This is Horam with Horam's Quorum. My guest today is Sonal Mehta. Sonal is a partner at WilmerHale, where she's also managing partner of the Silicon Valley office and also on the management committee of the firm. This conversation with Sonal stands out for her openness on how to continually grow as a lawyer at every stage and for the blend of analytical and intuitive that she uses at work and in her career. Here's Sonal.
Sonal, I'm so glad that we are having this conversation. I know you were skeptical that you had an interesting story to begin this episode with, but I'm excited to jump in with the story of your first deposition.
Well, I'm not sure it's that interesting, but it was pretty mortifying. So I was a young associate. I was taking a deposition of a witness who we weren't sure what he knew about a particular topic. So we needed to take his deposition, just figure that out. So I go into this deposition and the guy was so mad that he was being deposed. And I think what particularly angered him was that this kid was taking his deposition. So I show up, I take the deposition. He's super hostile. Turns out he doesn't know anything. So fine. It's a very short deposition. I report to all the people on my team that it was a short deposition and it was a non-event and the guy was kind of a jerk to me. And then later, one of the more senior lawyers was reading the transcript. And he came to me and he said, Sonal, I know it was your first deposition. But when you ask those questions at the beginning, does the witness understand that they're under oath and are they able to testify truthfully and accurately? And is there anything that would preclude them from testifying truthfully and accurately? He's like, you can't just say all of those things and then move on to your questions. You have to stop and ask a question and then have the witness answer before you move to the next point. And I was so mortified because it turned out I'd taken this deposition that was ultimately ended up, we figured out a total waste of time, but I couldn't even get the 5 questions at the beginning that came out of the deposition textbook correct. I totally screwed that part up. So yeah, it was quite the experience. And I now actually know how to ask those questions. So everyone knows I know how to confirm at the beginning that the witness knows that they need to testify truthfully and accurately in the deposition, can get through those questions before I start my depositions.
And then was your second deposition, how did that go?
That part went better. I will say that part went better, but we could talk about this more, but at the beginning of my career, definitely struggled with depositions. And there was a deposition not long later, not that long after that, probably a few months after that I took, and a partner was with me. And afterwards he said to me, Sonal, you're so good at everything else in this job. It's really strange that you're so bad at taking depositions. So that was, again, it was a really affirming moment for me in my early practice as an associate that I was so good at taking depositions that I was getting that comment back. But it did turn around, and I would like to think now that I'm actually much, much better at it. And it's actually one of my favorite parts of this job, but it just goes to show that, you could be good at some things and be really bad at others.
What do you attribute early on to the challenges around depositions for yourself?
I was trying, I think I actually spent a lot of time trying to figure this out. And I think I realized that I was trying too much to emulate other questioners. And so I had sort of examples of people that I thought were really great deposition takers. And so I would go in and I would try to do the deposition in the way that I thought they would do the deposition. And I would get, I think, in my head about it, and it would be awkward for me. And then I wasn't really connecting with the witness or being able to read the witness properly. I was really more focused on okay, now how would this person ask the next question? And it ended up just becoming this sort of weird vortex of me trying to figure out predictively what someone else would do in response to that answer, instead of listening to the answer and then thinking about, as the human sitting across the table from the witness, what's the appropriate follow-up or what's the admission that I want to try to get. So I think if I go back now and think about what I was doing, I was playing lawyer as opposed to being a lawyer. And I think once I got out of that, it got a lot easier and a lot better.
How did you make that transition?
Yeah, I wish I had some trick for how I did it. Candidly, I had just weird rhythms in my cases where there was a period of a year where I had no depositions at all. And then I went and took another deposition and it was completely different. Some switch had been flipped. And I suddenly felt like I knew what I was doing and I could do it. And then that deposition, I remember the deposition. I remember where I was. And I was like, oh, I can do this. Like, I know how to do this. This is great. And I think maybe it was the year in between that had me sort of distancing myself from like trying to mirror people that somehow made it better. And then suddenly like I was comfortable and I could do it. And from then on, it's been great.
And so now you're still taking depositions today, right?
Yes. I mean, I try very hard to give the younger lawyers on my team as many opportunities as I can, but I love taking depositions. So I don't think I'll ever give it up.
And do you have a preference between fact and expert depositions?
I mean, my favorite are expert depositions. If I could just take expert depositions every day for the rest of my career, I would be so happy. Unfortunately, there's other parts of litigation that you also have to do to get there. But that would be my absolute favorite. And I enjoy taking damages expert depositions, but I also really love taking like technical, expert depositions. I've recently done a bunch of like economist expert depositions. Absolutely love, taking expert depositions. Fact depositions are great too. Don't get me wrong, but the material that you have to work with an expert makes it especially fun.
Can you describe at a high level, like what's your philosophy around depositions? Like what's the strategy in terms of how much time you're taking, in terms of are there types of admissions or other kinds of work that you're getting? How are you thinking backwards from trial strategy? Can you give us a sense of your philosophy and approach to expert depositions?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a little bit of knowing what I need for either cross-examination at trial or for dispositive motions. And, often there's a substantial amount of overlap between those two things and the set of admissions that you want. But I'm really thinking about, usually when I go into a deposition, especially an expert deposition, what are the admissions that I want in like soundbite form that I could block quote in the introduction to my summary judgment motion to establish that their expert has conceded something that means that my client wins, right? Like that's like the frame that I want to think about an expert deposition in. And then once you do that, you're also getting, the material that you need for the cross at trial. And then I also want to have modules that are more sort of jury focused in terms of the cross that we might do of the expert at trial. But those are the sort of goals I'm really thinking about. I'm usually not wedded to an outline. I will have, the expert reports in front of me. I will have some form of an outline with the sort of different topics I want to cover and things like that. But I'm a much more sort of instinctual depo taker, I think, which is I start on a topic and then I see where the expert goes and then I'm going to follow that. And often it's about creating tensions or inconsistencies in the expert's opinions with other things that are happening in the case or the record. Often it's about sort of forcing them to take a really extreme form of the position, right? It's like, okay, well, if that's your opinion, then this must be true. And then this other thing must be true. And then this other thing must be true. And if those things are true, then really what you're saying is this crazy thing that no judge and no jury would ever believe is true, which means everything else falls apart. And so a lot of it to me is sort of listening and then the follow up much more than like what's on the piece of paper. And there's been expert depots where I've had an outline, but I actually haven't really even spent much time with it at all. I've really just looked at the report and the back and forth and followed what the expert said to its logical conclusion to get the admissions that I want.
And do you have an approach? I mean, I feel like I can think of, you might have a more of a different categories of experts and sizing people up. But I think about two kinds of experts. One is, the highly credentialed big ego expert. And there's definitely ways in which, of course, they can trip up on their ego. Then there's also the very sophisticated, has been deposed multiple times expert who is very good at not saying anything. Maybe you have other categories as well, but can you share about the kind of categories of experts you work with and techniques you use with those?
Yeah. I mean, I think those are two good categories in terms of like number of experts. That a lot of experts fall into both those categories. The other one, which in some ways is more challenging, I think, is first time or relatively newcomer expert, where, they're being called upon because they might actually truly be experts in that field, but aren't litigation pros don't really understand the process. And, all of those categories have, I think, different challenges to them. And I would take different approaches in all of them. I think with the newbie expert, right? Somebody that's like really steeped in a field, but hasn't been in litigation before. I think one of the challenges there is, they don't understand the litigation process often. And while there's some advantages to the taking attorney from that, one of the disadvantages is they're often like really reticent to answer questions. And they just it's like they're kind of paralyzed by the fact that they don't totally understand the process, and they're afraid that something they say is going to be a problem. And you sort of have to break them out of that and get them to start actually engaging. And get them to feel comfortable enough that they're not worried that every question is a trap, which maybe it is, maybe it's not, but they're not worried about that. Instead, they're starting to feel comfortable that they can actually just answer your questions. And then there's like the big ego experts. And with those guys or gals, but often guys, every questioner is going to have a different approach, but my approach is, look, maybe it would be effective to like feed the ego. I have a really hard time doing that just in general in life. Like I don't have a lot of patience for people with big egos. So I don't really feed the ego. But I just try to neutralize it, right? Like, it's like, I'm not going to go in and start challenging this person's credentials or opinions, and get them all defensive and get the ego all worked up. Instead, it's going to be more about like, what are the things that we can all agree on? Maybe let's start there, right? And maybe it's about making that person feel like, oh, she doesn't really know what she's doing. She's like asking me a bunch of softball questions, maybe kind of soften the ground, get to some points of agreement, some points of consensus, and then sort of start to build from there on what's the logical next step down the line. If you agree with this, then you'd have to agree with me that this other thing, and then you'd agree that this other thing, and then you sort of let it go that way. And if they're not feeling super challenged, often you can get them to agree to that. And I guess the good thing about a witness that has a big ego is they're also really worried about their credibility. And so when they feel like their credibility is on the line, they will concede, because they can't possibly be in a situation where, whoever they view to be their peers, or maybe a small group of people, but whoever they view to be their peers thinks that they're not being credible. I don't know this because I guess I've never like observed myself taking these different depositions, but I suspect that my style is actually not that different across these different modes of experts. Like, I'm sure there's some degree of phrasing the question and, friendliness and warmth that probably changes a little bit. But I've heard stories about lawyers that go in and they're like, they're sort of playing like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. Teach me everything. And I can't like put on a like fake personality, depending on who the expert is, to try to draw out whatever version of the expert. I'm just not good at that. So I just kind of have to do my thing, with more like tweaks around the edges of my questioning style than like totally different questioning styles.
And then do you have like, I know you use the word intuitive for describing how you approach it. Is there something about time that you're tracking? Like, is there like benchmarks you have for like what stage that you want to be at different hours?
It really depends on how much material I have to cover and like how much I feel like I'm going to be compressed for time. Usually I don't feel super jammed for time in depositions. I think I'm a pretty efficient questioner. And I think I'm pretty good at sort of gauging relatively early in the deposition, like how much the person is just going to sort of talk to fill the time. And so if I know that there's a witness that is going to filibuster and like their whole strategy sort of to that, the different categories of experts you were laying out earlier, like the category in the middle where they've done it enough to know that they can sort of dance around the question and not answer the question. If I know I'm going to be dealing with that type of witness, I will sometimes go in and say, okay, here are the like 4 topics I'm going to cover. And I need to be through these 3 by X time. I need, because I need an hour and a half for the last topic or whatever. And I could do like a rough allocation of time. I also usually will go in with, when I know there's going to be time constraints, with, like rank ordering of the priorities of the different topics I'm going to cover. And then if I feel like time's getting tight or the witness is just like rambling and eating time, there'll be things that I'll skip because I know it'll just be a time sink and I don't need them or whatever.
And when it comes to dealing with opposing counsel in circumstances, I think of two categories of challenging behavior. One is lawyers that are, there's a strong inference they're coaching the witness, or lawyers that are very hostile and, of course, making the expert feel this is a very adversarial. I mean, of course, it's an adversarial process, but feeling like there's something to be gained out of overtly being hostile. How do you deal with those? And maybe there's other circumstances too. How do you handle those challenges?
Yeah. I mean, I think in some ways those issues are actually worse with fact witnesses than with experts, because I think, not always, but most of the experts that we all deal with have done it enough that like they don't need the lawyer to be like super involved in terms of objecting and really guiding the deposition, the defending lawyer. So I feel like in my experience, the lawyers tend to be a little bit less involved in the deposition when it's an expert deposition. But regardless, whether it's expert or fact deposition, I mean, yeah, it's really unfortunate, but there are lawyers where you feel like, it's clear that statement was made with a direct intent to suggest to the witness what they should be saying. And I guess in terms of how I deal with it, courts these days, I think, have done a really good job setting out through local rules, through judges' standing orders, through local practice and expectation, some real strong incentives for lawyers not to do the coaching and not to do the, obstruction during deposition. So I think that helps a lot. And I think sort of pointing out that, if that behavior continues, then it might get taken up with the judge, and the judge is not going to have a lot of tolerance for that kind of behavior, usually ends up working. But my thing is like, I'm not going to make a big deal out of it and yell back. And I probably will let it go the first time or two, especially if it's like a younger lawyer who maybe just sort of trying to get their sea legs and figuring out how depositions go. But if it's someone really senior or it's happening over and over again, I think you just have to politely call it out and I think I've literally said in a deposition, quote, cut it out. You know what you're doing. You know what you're doing is wrong. Stop it. End quote. And, it didn't happen again. There were no more coaching. There was no more coaching. There was no more, commentary and colloquy in between the questions and the answers. That statement was made. The person actually looked a little embarrassed, and it went quite smoothly after that. So, I think there's an element of just like calling it out, and people, when it's called out, sometimes they realize they need to stop. Usually they realize they need to stop.
Yeah, I love that. What's the most, in either fact or expert deposition, what's one of the most surprising moments you've had in deposition?
I mean, I don't know that it's one, but I got to tell you, like, I have had some experts that have just like given up the farm, like just like in ways that it's like, were you prepped? Like, did you write the report in this case? How is it possible that that's the answer to the question? The only implication of that answer is that your client's case, or the party that you're representing, their case, literally cannot stand any longer. I've had that with technical experts in IP cases where the technical expert has admitted something that would, maybe not in exactly those words mean non-infringement, but basically like in response to a hypothetical, where it was like, okay, well, so, assume X, Y, and Z. Would the answer be yes, or would the answer be no? And they got it wrong, and they said no, which means my client wins. And then we took that admission and we went to the judge and we won summary judgment. So I have to say, like, it is a little surprising actually when someone that's like spent so much time on the case, worked on a report, presumably went through the report multiple times with their lawyers to prepare for the deposition, when they just like sometimes just give you the absolute wrong answer from their client's perspective. I do find that surprising. Now I find it awesome. And that's like a really, really good day. And I have some really like fond memories of those days. But it's like, I still can't believe it when it happens.
So I think what's so interesting is that you went from depositions being, it sounds like one of the most challenging things to you, and it was perceived by the team that you're working with as well, to one of your strengths. Do you feel like that's often the case for people? Because I would say for myself, the things that I feel like, I would say things being like, being oriented to growing a network or, something, being in sales capacity or even writing, these are things that historically I didn't perceive to be strengths of mine, that in perceiving them not to be strengths of mine, I worked on them and found my own ways to practice them. And now I perceive them to be strengths of mine. So I've noticed that in myself, and it sounds like that's true for you. Have you observed that in others? Do you think that's much more common than we realize? Is that the things that later in someone's career becomes their strength is something that started out as a weakness?
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't actually thought about it that way until you just phrased the question that way. But as you were going through those examples, I was thinking about sort of my own examples of like things that were issues that I struggled with or parts of this job I struggled with. And now I think maybe are amongst my strengths. And I think you're right that, well, I guess I would say this. I think it is true for some people that those areas of weakness end up actually being the areas in which they're stronger because they put in the time to improve on them. If it's pointed out to you that it's an area of weakness or you realize it's an area of weakness, it becomes something that you're then thinking about and you're conscious of. And I think you're trying to improve. But I also think there are some people, or some areas in which for people, it might be a weakness, but you like don't have it in you to try to improve it, or you don't want to improve it, or you think it's like you can't because it's not consistent with your personality to improve it. So I guess that's it's a little bit of a wishy-washy answer, but I think it depends. But I do think you're right that like another area for me that was like such a challenge, and I still hate it, to be fair. Like I hate it, but I think I'm getting better at it, is the like network building and business development. It was awful. I hated it. I never thought I'd be able to do it. I never thought I'd be able to have any clients because I never thought I'd be able to meet any clients because I just found the whole thing to just be like there was like this mystique around business development. And then when people talked to me about how they did it, I thought it was like all super awkward, like social interactions that I would never want to have. And now I think I'm like, fine. I don't like it and I'm not great at it, but I like know enough people that I like, can keep myself occupied and out of trouble. But I had to spend a lot of time working on it, and people had to kind of push me, actually in some ways, maybe more than I had to spend time working on it. Like people that were my mentors, people that I was working with had to push me to do it. Really kind of aggressively because I was really resisting it. And thankfully they pushed me to work on it as a young lawyer and it got better. But I do think there's an element of like, going back to your original question, which I know is now ages ago, like there's an element of both the internal motivation and drive to improve in areas of weakness. And then there's the element of like people pushing you to improve. And for me, I think I have a bit of that self-drive, but I also have been lucky to have the people at every stage of my career pushing me to improve.
So I think it's remarkable to hear someone who's accomplished as much as you have say they're having a challenge around something that would maybe be perceived as a core function, like, hey, you're a partner, that's the core function. You're also on the managing committee of WilmerHale, which is, a very established and, a well-regarded firm. So I think it'd be very valuable for a lot of people to hear about how you're approaching this and how you're, there's a challenge even someone with as many accomplishments is working through. So can you share a little bit like what's working for you and like how are you thinking about like progressing through this and how you're thinking about improving this and making it more tractable for you?
Yeah. I mean, like it's been a journey. I think it's been a journey for me, to use the cliche. Like when I was when I was a senior associate and a young partner, I was given some coaching, like while I made partner while I was an associate there, and I made partner there, and I was a young partner there. And they identified for new partners these like business development mentors that were senior partners that were very successful at the firm, usually in different practice areas. And in my case, even a different office, whose relationship was to mentor me in business development. And like, I'm so thankful. Like, he made me like write a business plan as a first year partner. and I hated every minute of it. And I hated the process of making the plan. I hated everything I thought I might have to do to execute on the plan. Like I would write down things that I was going to do. And as I was writing them down, I'd be like, I can't believe that I would ever have to do this. This is going to be so awkward and painful. So it really went from like being forced, thankfully, to think about it and plan for it and sort of confront that I hated it, to then the way that my sort of evolution of thinking has happened is realizing that actually, even though I went through that whole process, like that wasn't going to work for me. Like having a formal business development plan, having like here are the people that I'm going to check in with every month. Here's the articles that I'm going to write. I'm going to go speak on X number of panels. I'm going to go to Y conference and go to this cocktail party. Like that kind of formality to this just was never going to work for me, because after writing it all down, I just like was dreading doing any of it. And the journey has been realizing that, at least for me, what works, to the extent it works, is just like actually getting to know people that I like. And it's amazing to me how so many of the opportunities that I've had and the really great like connections and great work that I've had have been with where there was no intentionality behind it at all. Like it was just somebody that I struck up a conversation with, or somebody that I like, they asked me for a favor and I did them a favor and I never thought I'd hear from them again. And then lo and behold, like something happened, right? Just like sort of, it sounds so, oversimplified and maybe a little bit naive, but I think just like putting good things out into the world, and coupling that with like doing good work has been really successful for me, to the extent anyone would say I have success in that area. And it also is just a lot easier for me. It's like a lot easier for me to like do good work and just like genuinely talk to people that I like and spend time with people that I like than doing anything formal. Mm-hmm. And like, a lot of the people I work with are like clients that I work with are people that I like was associates with. Like that's the other thing I think people don't realize maybe when they're growing up in the law. So for those of you that are like a little more junior in your career, like the person down the hall that's your peer today, they will, as you get more senior in this business, so will they, even if they're not at the firm anymore. And those people end up like wanting to work with you in the future when they become clients. And so many of the people that I work with, as clients are former colleagues of mine. I teach a class at Berkeley, and a number of my clients are former students from the class, who then years later went in-house and, had a problem and called me. And so for me, that's just been much more successful than any kind of like, networking plan that I could then go execute on.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like this is also an intuitive process. So it sounds like
it is
when you have an intuitive process. I want to go back to something you were talking about when you were early in your deposition journey, and you were noticing, oh, I'm really trying to respond like this other lawyer that I admire or have learned from. And I guess the way I would phrase that is finding your voice. Were you able to find your voice else from that time, and then just like the deposition part were slower, or is that just part and parcel of generally finding your voice, and that was something that you came into? And can you talk about that process?
I actually think that was maybe the most acute example of the overall process of finding my voice. Cause I definitely had that in other places too, I think. And I think every lawyer goes through this. I think for me, it was, especially difficult because I did not have many women, or really any women mentors, or senior women to look up to as I was growing up as a young lawyer. And I had tremendously talented, like, off the charts talented, mentors and senior lawyers to look up to. Don't get me wrong, but they were all men. And so my sort of examples of like very basic things like, how do you start a meet and confer call with opposing counsel and like build that rapport? They were all men. And so I often give this example to younger lawyers, but like probably one of the biggest struggles that I had was figuring out how to build a rapport with opposing counsel that's like organic and genuine, when the examples I would sometimes see would be like the senior partner getting on the phone with opposing counsel and at the start of the call being like, "Hey buddy, did you catch the game last night?" And, the "Hey buddy, did you catch the game last night?" Like, I can't start a meet and confer call that way. First of all, I don't know what the game was. I definitely didn't catch it. And then and everybody knows that. I mean, there's nobody that would think that I caught the game last night. It'd be a miracle if I knew what sport we were in, in terms of the season. Right. So, that was a big struggle for me, is like, how do I do that thing, which is really important, like developing a relationship and a rapport with opposing counsel is like critical to being able to serve your client's needs. How do I do that if I don't have the "Hey buddy"? And I just kind of had to figure it out. And I do think there are people that are better at that now than me. There are definitely people that have more of an ability to connect on that kind of thing than I do, but I've sort of figured it out well enough that I can do it and it serves my clients' needs. And that's true for courtroom advocacy. It's true for depositions. It's true for, business development interactions. It's true for when I go and pitch a case. It's true for when I'm interacting with opposing counsel. Like, in every aspect of this job, I think there was a learning curve for me to find my voice. And I think there were parts of it that were harder than others, and depositions might be an example of that.
Can you speak to subtly the lawyering itself, as far as like legal decision making, judgment analysis? How did you come into your own voice there? Because it's just so easy to try to say, well, I guess, like, how would you think about this case? But I think there's a lot to be said for how you approach your own case. And this is something I just had through Silpa Mari. And that was something that was a hallmark of her earlier career, and kind of set her in the path where now she's a founding partner of the law firm. And so she had some, it sounds like creativity was in following her own judgment was a key part of her story. And I'm curious what your thoughts are for yourself, for how you came to find your voice substantively.
Yeah. Okay. So now this is going to sound arrogant. I don't mean it to sound arrogant. But that's actually not somewhere where I felt like I struggled as much. Like, I think even from when I was a very young lawyer, like, rightly or wrongly, for better or for worse, I always had a pretty high degree of confidence in my judgment about things. And I almost always had like a pretty strong early instinctive reaction to sort of like what the right thing was. And like, of course, I would need the factual and the legal inputs to that. Like, I need to understand what the legal frame is that we're looking at. I need to understand like the facts on the ground were, but like what we should do after we know what the facts are and what the law are, and we've like laid out the sort of, here are the different options. Here's what here's the, should we do A, B, or C? Which of those things we should do, and the why and the how we should execute on them. Again, rightly or wrongly, and probably in a lot of instances naively, I always kind of just had a gut of like, okay, I thought about A, I've thought about B, I've thought about C. Like, I can see the pros and cons. Like, we should do B. Here's why we should do B. And here's how we should execute on B. And so that was a place where I didn't feel like I needed to find the skills to do the execution. I needed to gain the credibility to convince people that I was right, but I didn't struggle with figuring out what I thought the answer should be.
Okay, so let's take someone who was counseled, hey, you know what, you're really great. So early in the career, you're really great at depositions. So opposite advice to you, but you have a challenge around exercising your own judgment around in confidence in your own decision making around applying frameworks just in the way that you're talking about. How would you counsel that lawyer who's kind of your inverse in that way?
Yeah. I mean, this is hard for me because for me, it is more instinctive. But I think what I would counsel them to do is, essentially what I said my gut does for me, which is the baseline for all of this is, of course, knowing the law and knowing the facts. I mean, we can't operate as lawyers if we don't do that. So I'm assuming that once you have that, I guess what I would counsel them to do is think about, what are the options? Like, what's the menu of options? What are the pros and cons of the menu of options? And like, And there, I think you have to think expansively. Like there's obvious pros and cons in any decision, but there's often like secondary or tertiary pros and cons that are less obvious, and that requires some effort and some experience and to really think through. And I would encourage people to really think about like sort of first order pros and cons, but also secondary and tertiary order pros and cons. And then I think, at that point, then it gets hard. Then it's like, okay, so now I looked at all the pros and cons. How do I make a decision? And I guess, again, this is coming from someone who's more like an instinct person on this sort of thing. But I guess for me, it would be priorities in terms of end goal. And because those priorities are going to let you weigh the pros and cons, right? So if you have a bunch of pros and you have a bunch of cons, you're like, well, there's a lot of pros and a lot of cons here. Like, how do I make a decision? One of those, either in the pro column or the con column, is going to go to whatever the most important goal is of a particular project or a particular matter or a particular business. And I think you then have to be sort of, at least for me, like you're making a judgment based on, I have to do something here, even when it's not going to be, I don't have perfect knowledge. Let me go with something that based on what I think the priorities are going to help me optimize to the outcome that I want. And I think all of like what I just laid out is, I guess, a very logical way of thinking about what I think kind of my gut is doing when I'm thinking about it from that perspective. The other thing I would tell people that are struggling with that is, you're not always going to get it right. And if you are paralyzed by the desire or the need to like know with certainty that the decision that you're making is going to work out the way that you think it's going to work out or you want it to work out, like you got to just get over that. Like we make decisions in life. I mean, in law, but in life, you can only make the best decision you can at the time that you have to make it with the best information available to you at that time. That's all we could ever ask for from anyone. And you don't always have all the information or circumstances might change. But you got to just make the decision. And then you've got to be able to like live with the consequences and trust that you're doing the best you can now. And that you will also, your future self will be in a good position to deal with whatever the consequences are. Hopefully it all works out exactly the way you want. But if not, you have to trust that you'll be there to deal with the consequences and your future self will exercise its judgment to optimize at that moment in time.
I'm going to use this as a jumping off point to explore another moment in your career. And I'm going to ask you, so I'm going to reflect back that you're saying, you don't always know if you're going to get it right. You've got a certain set of facts before you. The world is uncertain. You may not have all the relevant facts. The world will change, but you just have to move forward and you have to apply your judgments and, based on past decision making to move forward and make decisions in the face of uncertainty. And I think that's a very powerful concept because in my role as a legal recruiter, I see this routinely with lawyers, big law lawyers, who are so used to, I think it's largely driven by the billable hour, which is so used to mining for more and more facts, more and more analysis is the solution, rather than saying at some point you have to say good enough and you have to make a decision, and not just based on facts, but then also intuition like you're talking about, gut. And you have to blend those two to make, factually informed, holistic decisions. So I think that's a very important concept for a lot of lawyers to consider. And I'm curious for your career change when you were moving from Weil to Jerry Tangri, how did you apply that concept? Did you apply that decision-making tool to make that change?
Yes, I did. But like, again, in the way that I make decisions, which is, I think part of it was my gut too. Right. And I will say like that decision, I just still, I mean, to this day, it's been almost 10 years now, is the single hardest decision I've ever made, in my career and maybe in my life, honestly. Like it was an agonizing decision. And, it took me a really, really long time to even be open to thinking about it. And then it took me a really, really long time once I was open to thinking about it to make up my mind. And then there was a period after I made up my mind where I didn't think I'd made up my mind. And I was agonizing over whether that was really the right decision or not. It was a long process, and there was a lot of lost sleep, a lot of sleepless nights over that. But the decision-making process that I went through was, funnily enough, formal. It was a more formal decision-making process than what we've been talking about. And it was along the lines of what I just like talked to you about, the like pro cons and evaluating them and thinking about the importance. And I actually wrote it down, and I had like a spreadsheet. And so this is like so not Sonal, like the most non-Sonal way to make a decision, which was like I had a matrix of all the factors and the pros and the cons, and I weighted it and everything. And so when I said it was sort of funny that you asked that, it's like, yeah, I had this like super formal process, but I think honestly, like if you put me back in the headspace that I was in at the time, everything about the process was really ultimately being driven by my gut. And so what I mean by that is like I had all these factors, and, you know, it was like this agonizing decision. And then at the end, I think that the way that I weighted them and the way that I sort of came to the decision was really based more on instinct than anything else. Which I think really just goes to the point we were talking about earlier, which is I think my instinct in some ways like just inherently does the pro con analysis that I'm talking about. Or maybe the pro con analysis is a way to like manifest what's happening when I make a gut decision. And I think that's probably true for everyone, right? Like, and maybe really when we talk about people that are more instinctive and people that are less instinctive, like it's really less about, is it a different decision-making process, or is it more about how much you trust your instinct, in an express way, as opposed I know that I can trust my gut versus people that feel like they want to go through the more formal process. And so they're not calling it instinctive or instinctual. They're really saying that they're going through a process. Cause I think in a lot of cases it reduces to the same thing. But anyway, that was my process. It was an agonizing, awful process, worst year of my life. And hardest decision I've ever made. And then I ended up going with my gut.
What even prompted this decision? Because, you know, you started out while you made partner there, so things clearly were going well there. What even got you thinking about making a change?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it was like, it actually was a process to even get me to be open to the idea of leaving. I loved my time at Weil. Just genuinely like had the best experience there. Could not have asked for a better place to grow up as a young lawyer. Felt like I got such amazing experience and opportunity and mentorship and training from, you know, the best in the business. And like the people that were there at the time that I was working with are just like so incredible. And I'm so grateful for the time that I had there. And I honestly like thought I would be there my whole career. Like I wasn't thinking about leaving. What got me thinking about, or got me to be open to the idea, was the Dre Tagre opportunity came up, and, you know, it was sort of a new thing for them too. I was the first lateral partner ultimately that they had, and they hadn't really ever thought that they would do that because they formed as a boutique of people that knew each other professionally, but also were really close friends. So it was really, you know, in some ways like kind of like a family firm, right? Like they were all so close and they'd all worked together for so long. And they were thinking about whether it might make sense to bring someone else on. And so when that opportunity presented itself, it was the kind of thing that it never had occurred to me that would be something that I could do, because like they had never had a lateral partner before. And, you know, so it was like not an option. And then suddenly like there was a conversation and I was like, oh, I guess I should think about this, because I like never would have thought about this before. And that's what really got me thinking about it. And then I think your question ultimately was like, what made me decide to move? And I think it was a combination of, again, sometimes I need a push. It was a push. And this one actually came from myself, not from other people. But it was an internal push to, bet on myself and do something that was not the sort of safe, obvious thing to do. Like things were going great at Weil. I loved it there. I'd worked with the same people for 12 and a half years. I love those people. I still love those people. And they're still friends, and I still respect them as lawyers and respect them as people and consider them close friends. And so it was like such the safe, easy thing to do to stay. But I felt like I needed the internal push of like, okay, maybe you need to try to go do something a little bit different and take a little bit of a risk here, even though things are going great, and to have that independence, to maybe see how I could operate as a lawyer without the same set of people that I'd been working with for 12 and a half years, without the comfort of knowing exactly who was going to be on my teams and who the clients were and all of that. And it was that push to like bet on myself and sort of see what might happen if I went out and did something different, that ultimately I think was the instinct that drove the decision.
And when you say bet on yourself, what was the potential upside and what was at risk?
Yeah. I mean, I think, look at Weil, like I was a very young partner. So I had, a few of my own matters, or matters where the client had sort of primarily come to me, but not a lot. Like I didn't have like, a huge set of matters and a huge track record, as a first chair lawyer. And I'd done a trial as a co-lead with someone. And then I had like a few small cases where I was first chair. But it was all sort of new. And so the potential upside was, I would be able to go and be the lead lawyer. And I don't mean that in a like your name's at the top of the caption kind of a way. For me, it was more about like, it's my strategy and my judgment that is going to guide the outcome in this case. And that was like what was really appealing to me, was to be able to, again, like sort of think about how do I see this case? How do I see us winning this case? Trusting my gut on that and being in a position to sort of steer the outcome of the case was like really, I thought it would be really rewarding to me to be able to do that. So there's that, like, that was the potential upside, right? It was like, I could maybe do more of that if I was at a place where I wasn't with the same people that I've been working with forever, and where it was new clients too, right? Where the clients didn't already have people that they had worked with and teams they'd worked with forever, but there would be like potentially new clients, and new people to work with. And so that was the independence and the sort of upside. The downside is the obvious downside, which is like nobody would ever hire me and no one would ever want to work with me, and I'd show up and have no work and nothing to do. And the sort of notion that like I was going to be able to lead cases was one that was a delusion. And that was the risk, right? Is that was all, totally delusional, and nobody would trust me with their matters. Thankfully, people did trust me with their matters, and it worked out okay, but that was the risk.
Can we talk some more about your spreadsheet? Like, were there like, say, like 3 top factors in that we can talk about? And like, how did your spreadsheet work?
Oh, Coram, there were so many more than 3 factors. So there were 3 tiers. I'm in anticipation of this. You prompted me to go back and look at it, which I hadn't done in like 9 years. But there were 3 tiers of importance, and in each tier there were multiple factors, and they were given weights. So tier 1 had a 50% weight, and tier 2 had a 30% weight, and tier 3 had a 20% weight. And then there was a point value assigned to each factor from 1 to 5. But I'll give you a couple of examples on here of like the ones that were in the different buckets. You can kind of see what was driving it. So in the first tier, the highest importance tier for me, independence actually was one of them. So sort of going back to what I think ultimately drove the decision in a lot of ways, that was a really important factor, I think, in the decision. Collegiality and collaboration was really important to me as well. And that was not something that was pushing me away from Weil. I mean, if anything, that would have been something that was weighing in favor of staying, because I had a family there, really, in terms of the people that I'd worked with. But that was super, super important to me, is working somewhere where I was on the team, I was part of the team had my back, and vice versa. And there was no like internal competition. Easy to work with clients is on there. Cause I think like the quality of life you have as a lawyer depends a lot on the clients. And having clients that are collaborators and partners and respect their outside counsel and view it as a long-term partnership is super important. And, there are some clients that are easier to work with than others. And it was important to me to feel like from a quality of life perspective that I would have clients that would fall on the easier to work with side of the scale. So those are like practice, reputation. Those are kind of in the top tier in terms of importance. The second tier, I'm not going through all of them, by the way. I'm just going through some examples. Second tier was, tranquility and like lack of internal, politics, competition, drama, whatever the word is for it. Like feeling like you're at an institution that's like a stable institution where everyone's like generally rowing in the same direction. That was important. And that was in tier 2 for me. Senior lawyers that would be mentors to me was on the list. So as much as I was looking for independence, I also like definitely didn't want to be in a situation where I didn't have access to like really high quality and high caliber senior lawyers that could mentor me. The size and the complexity of the matters that I would work on, was in that, category as well. It was important to me that the, quality of my peers, would be incredibly high, both from a like collegiality and interpersonal perspective, but also from a like, these are all lawyers that I think are amazing and like really talented. And I'm learning from them and I'm like proud to be at the firm and be their colleagues. That's really important to me. And that was on the list. And then I'll skip some and go to the third tier. The third tier included things like, location, like my commute. It included things like firm economics and stability, which I'm not sure that should really be a third tier, but it was at that time for me in that decision-making process.
Also hard to size up,
It is.
So,
Yeah, totally. Although it was a little bit more of a structural question at that particular time because I was deciding between a big law firm and a boutique. And so it was less about sort of like evaluating the financial stability of the individual firm as like more of the model question.
Mm-hmm.
But still, I mean, it was hard to make judgments about that. And, both of them would have been fine and were fine on that metric. And then, work variety and diversification was also something that I was thinking about. It was on my list in that third tier. What you would find interesting, maybe some people might, is that compensation was in the third tier, and it was also expressly termed as compensation over 5 years, because I wasn't really focused on compensation in the first few years at all. And even over 5 years, it was only a third tier consideration as opposed to a first tier consideration for me.
And then looking back in terms of doing a post-op of that decision, were there factors of those that turned out to be most relevant? And I asked this because there's another patent litigator partner that I know that made a move, and he worked with a skillful recruiter who explained to him, let's figure out what's important to you in advance. And then as he's going through interviews, he would, this partner would rank the different firms by this criteria and then also rank which firm he's enjoying the most. And then this recruiter pointed out, hey, look, the things that you said at the outset are most important to you aren't in fact the things that you're valuing most in the firm. So what you thought was important isn't as important as you thought it was. Did you experience anything like this, or are you pretty validated with the things you knew in advance to be important turned out to be the things that were really important to you?
Well, I would say the things that I thought were important to me, I think did turn out to be important to me. But part of the reason for that is there's like literally like 25 things on here. So it's like I don't think I missed anything. I like covered every single possible factor you could have. So it was not the case that like, as I was going through my process, I was like, oh, I didn't have that on my list, but now I'm realizing that's really important. Everything was on my list, important or not. But what I did find that's sort of consistent with what you just said is now looking back at it, it's like very clear to me that the numerical values I assigned for these different things are not like in any way objective and were completely driven by like what my gut was telling me the decision should be. And that was driven by independence, I think, right? Like, I think ultimately, like, as much as I loved Weil, like, if the thing that drove me to go was feeling like I kind of needed to do my own thing and see, like, sink or swim, see what it would be like just to be me. And everything about this matrix and the values that I filled out in this, I think were colored by that. Like, as much as I thought I was like doing this like super rigorous diligence process and like very objectively, assigning these point values, I don't think I was.
Did the fact, I mean, you've heard a while, that team is your family. Did the fact, I can see how that fact could cut in direction of, oh, wow, I shouldn't leave. Couldn't it just as equally, or did it just as equally factor in to say, hey, I'm always going to have a special relationship with this team and they'll always be in my life in some way? So,
I mean, you're right. That's what turned out to be the case. Like, the people that I was close with, I stayed close with, and still I'm like, I'm still their cheerleader and I root them on and want them to be successful. And I'm so excited when I see their successes. At the time though, like, I think when you're in that moment, you don't have the clarity to like know that the people that you're going to be that you're friends with, you'll be friends with forever. Like, or at least I didn't. Part of it was that's like the only real job I ever had. I mean, I had like a summer internship in college. And then I was like a paralegal for 6 months between college and law school. And I taught LSAT and GRE classes through the Princeton Review. But like, the only real job I'd ever had was working at Weil. And I'd been there forever, and I had been with these same people forever, working with them forever. And so at the time I thought, the people I was closest with, like, I knew that we would still be in touch, but I just thought it was going to like irrevocably change the nature of our relationship. I thought they would be mad at me. I had a lot of guilt around leaving. And so it wasn't like a comforting thing that I was really close with them. I think it actually made the decision so much harder. I think if I'd had a little more separation from them and hadn't felt so close to them, it would have been easier. And I would have made the decision a lot faster than I did.
And then what ultimately led you to move from Jury Tongery to Wilmer?
So again, this was like a similar process, which was like, these are things that I feel like, at least for me, are more about external or internal pushes to take risks. Things were going great at Jury Tongery. It was a great firm, really, really, like, I mean, talk about like punching above your weight, like the caliber of the lawyers and the matters that like the small San Francisco boutique was handling is like really kind of amazing to think about. It no longer exists in that same form, but at that time it was like, really kind of amazing. And things were going great there. Like, my practice was booming. I had sort of I went from, in 2019, wondering if anyone would ever hire me to be their lawyer, to like having this booming practice, having all these amazing clients and trusting me with like things that, frankly, I'm not sure I was qualified at the time as a younger partner to be entrusted with, but I was like learning and growing and rolling with it. And I was able to deliver these great outcomes for some of these clients. And the internal push this time wasn't independence, but it was, wouldn't I be able to do more if I had more resources, if I had more people, if I had more expertise across different practices or different areas? Like, couldn't I help clients solve bigger problems? And some of that was like truly like internal. And some of that also was from clients who were like, like, such a great firm. You guys are awesome. But like, there's sort of a cap on what we can give you in terms of the scale of the matter, because you just don't have the like resources. And have you ever thought about what your practice could look like if you were back on a bigger platform? And so that was this time it's like the coupling of the internal and the external push of, everything's going great. Why would I take the risk? Well, maybe I should take the risk and see if the practice can expand into sort of more complicated, more interesting matters, or bigger scale matters, or however you want to think about it, if I have the resources of a firm with broader expertise.
Why Wilmer, not Weil again?
I had been working with Wilmer on some matters as co-counsel and like was really impressed by the lawyers, and we had a lot of common clients with Wilmer. So like the client map really kind of worked out well. There were a couple clients that unfortunately like the conflicts were going to not make it possible going forward. But by and large, like it was almost complete overlap in clients. And so that was really attractive. And I'd been working with Wilmer lawyers in like a co-counsel capacity and had really just a tremendously positive experience. Like very often when you're co-counsel with like another law firm, there's, sharp elbows, there's competition, there's attempts to like one up one another in front of the client. And the Wilmer lawyers there was none of that. It was like really very, very like we're all one team, like genuinely. And I was the outsider and felt that way. So that was really attractive to me. And so I think that was the sort of pull to Wilmer. And then from the Weil perspective, like Weil, still like so many of the people that I worked with are there, and it's still such a wonderful firm. But, I had sort of moved on, and I also think that, maybe this is just someone said this to me later, and I don't think I was processing it at the time, but when they said it later, I was like, that could be part of it. They said, wouldn't you be worried that if you moved back to Weil, people would perceive that as a failure? Like you tried to go out on your own and then you couldn't make it. And so then you went back to the comfortable. I never thought that. That was like never in my mind, expressly. But maybe that was subconsciously part of it as well.
Fair enough. And so I think part of what I'm interested in is, we've been talking about some of what's made you successful as a lawyer. And I want to double back to something we were talking earlier on we're on the cusp of exploring it. Your core competencies, like what would you say are the 2 or 3 things that you feel really drive your success?
Yeah. I mean, I guess given the way this conversation has gone, it won't surprise anyone to hear that I think my gut and my instincts are pretty important. I also think, God, this is hard. I don't like talking about, this sort of stuff because it makes me seem braggy, but, I guess if I were hiring myself, like if I were an in-house counsel, and I was like, why would I want to hire Sonal? If I had to come up with a list, I would say, I do think my instincts are pretty good. I think that I am pretty good at figuring out what's going to matter and what's not going to matter. Like if we're dealing with like a complex set of facts or issues or whatever, like, again, going back to my gut, like, I usually am like, okay, these things are going to matter. We need to spend a lot of time and attention. Like if it's a litigation, like these defenses are going to matter. So we really need to develop our defenses here, or this witness is going to matter a lot. Or this, set of meetings in 2022 is going to matter a lot. Like for some reason through gut or whatever experience combination thereof, like if you kind of lay out everything, I'll be able to tell you usually like, here are the things that I think are going to matter in the end. Here are the things that I think are going to fall away over the course of the case or over the course of the issue that we're dealing with. So I think that's another reason that if I were an in-house lawyer, I might look to me. And then the third is I may not be the best lawyer, but I do care a lot. Like there are a lot of really fantastic lawyers out there, and I'm not suggesting that I'm like one of the best, but if you hire me for something, or if like I take on a client's problem, like I am going to sweat it to the last detail. I am going to lose sleep over it. It's going to be the thing that's in my mind when I'm brushing my teeth in the morning. It's going to be the thing that's on my mind when I'm driving to the grocery store on Sunday. Like I, probably in a way that's unhealthy, really, 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 really care about my matters, and I live and I breathe them, and they like become my life for whatever period of time I am involved in them. And I think it's probably unhealthy for me as a person, but it probably does serve my matters well that I'm doing that.
I mean, it does make sense because I don't think anyone can become really good at something if it isn't on their mind 24 hours a day. And frankly, it's something that I realized about. This is part of my criteria for being okay with not pursuing patent litigation, because I just knew I'm never thinking about an expert report in the shower. I'm just not. And so the things you think about in the shower, I think, are such a great measure of what you're driven by. And so, and that's because no one can, as far as sitting in front of a laptop or a computer or whatever and working, there's only so many hours that even the most super, worker can do that. But the real competitive advantage is if that's just always going on in the back of your mind or at some point in the front of your mind, pretty much all day, that's how you really get any kind of competitive advantage in a field.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that's right. And I think it is, I think it's also sometimes that's where like the creative ideas come from, right? Like, I don't like, yeah, I'm sitting at my desk and like, or we're in a meeting and we're brainstorming something and great ideas come from that. Obviously, otherwise we wouldn't have those meetings. But sometimes I'll be like in the car going somewhere and I'll be like, what if we did this crazy thing? And I'll like call my colleague and be like, hey, I know this is like totally random, but what if we did X, Y, or Z? And they'll be like, oh my God, yeah. And then we could do this. And then it's like that. And it's not even like maybe a concrete thought process. It's not like I was sitting in the car, like, okay, now I'm going to think about this case. I'm going to think about like, what are we going to do? Just like your mind wanders and it's like doing the thing. My mind never shuts off ever, but it's like whatever it's on. Sometimes the like most creative things come to me when my mind is like just doing its like wandering thing, when I'm in the car. And like, I do think that's really critically important to success. Because if you're just doing the like playbook that we all know and that we do at your desk, like that's going to work a lot of the time. But the like a lot of the brilliance, I think, that comes when you see someone do something really brilliant in this profession or any profession is it's not the playbook. It's something that came up kind of totally out of left field or someone's creative idea. And I aspire to do that as, more than I do. I would love to be the person that's like always coming up with like brilliant creative insights.
Tell me about the parts of your work that you enjoy the least. Depositions you love. What do you dislike about litigation?
Yeah. I mean, this has changed, I think, over time, as you might expect, right? As anyone's career, changes, or as careers evolve. When I was a younger lawyer, I used to love discovery, like, and which is a weird thing to say, I know, but I used to love it. I used to love the like meet and confers with the other side and the letters that you'd write back and forth and like the sort of, it was like fun and it was like outsmarting the other side on a discovery issue. Like I used to really, really, really enjoy that. And as I have gotten more senior or just older, maybe is really what it is. Like I just find so much of the back and forth of litigation, to be, unnecessary and, focused on things that don't really matter. And there's so much posturing that happens and there's so much lack of civility that goes on. And maybe it's that it's getting worse. Maybe it's just sort of luck of the draw of the people that I'm interacting with. Maybe it's me having less tolerance for that as I get older and grumpier. But I like that part of this job I could definitely do with less of. Discovery is necessary and it's appropriate and we have to do it. But a lot of the incentives that people have are really perverse in the discovery context or in litigation generally. And I find that there's not as much discipline as there needs to be around that. And I really, it's really a shame because I feel it's such a tax on our system, and it's such a black mark on our system that we all spend so much time and money fighting over things in non-productive ways. And that people end up then becoming uncivil or completely unreasonable, in that context. So I'd say that's one thing I like less. I hate doing bills and time entry and all that stuff. Like I have said to many people, this job would be perfect if you didn't have to deal with any of the money associated with it. Like if I didn't have to go out and like do budgets or enter my time or submit bills or follow up on bills. Like if I was like infinitely independently wealthy and could just be like a litigation partner for free, and never had to think about any of the money associated with it in any direction, I'd be very happy.
Can you say, I mean, there's another role that you've taken on. So you were on the executive committee, which is, I think, a lot of responsibility for an institution, an old institution. And so then how do you, I guess a couple questions come to mind is one is, and I've talked to other people that are, so I've interviewed Moaz Kaba, who's managing partner of Houston Hennigan, and Kalpana Srinivasan, who's the co-managing partner of Sussman Godfrey. So both are trial lawyers with a very busy docket, but then also in this management capacity. So I've explored the relationship between those two. And so I'm curious for you as well. How does your trial practice inform your approach to being on the EC and vice versa?
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing is thankfully I'm just one of many members of our management committee. And so unlike Kalpana and Moaz, who have like to balance their trial practices with like actually running the firm, we have a real managing partner and deputy managing partner who do the work along with a tremendously talented, executive team that do all the hard work. But I guess the way I think about it, I'm on the management committee of the firm and I'm involved in leadership of the litigation department. And I'm also now the partner in charge of our Palo Alto office. So sort of thinking about management from a few different angles or lenses. I think the way in which my litigation background influences the way I think about management is, and I think it really annoys people, to be honest, and probably rightly so, but I ask a lot of questions, like a lot of questions. I think the way that my mind works as a litigator is to like interrogate everything. And so I'd like, we have to make a decision about something. And my first instinct is, okay, well, what about this? And what's the basis for that? And where, what's the facts that support X, Y, and Z? And where do we get that data? And what's the other data? And what's the source for that data? Like I just start to really start all the questions that you would have if you were like a litigator, either, presenting, getting a position ready to present, or if you're the judge and you were sort of going through and trying to make a decision, like I interrogate everything. Sometimes I interrogate things that probably don't matter, but I just it's my instinct to ask a lot of questions. And so that's the way I think that my training as a litigator influences the way that I think about management or my role in management, because I have a small role amongst a lot of super talented people that have just tremendous judgment and wisdom. And I'm just trying to add some value where I can. But the way I think about my value is asking all those questions, because maybe a lot of them are obvious or a lot of them don't matter, but maybe every once in a while I will ask a question that is a different way of thinking about it, or make sort of an underlying point that someone else hadn't thought about, or elicits new information or data that contributes to the conversation in a way that's helpful. So I don't know if other people would say that's my value add, or if they would say I'm adding any value at all, but I would like to think that if there's value add, that's where it's coming from. And that's all that's me as a litigator. That's where that comes from, I think.
And conversely, has your role on the management committee influenced how you litigate?
Yeah, I think it has, because I think it's maybe not in a way that I could sort of concretely express, but I think it has in a couple of ways, sort of subconsciously, at least. One is, the people that I'm on the management committee with are people that I might not otherwise get to spend a ton of time with, because our management committee includes people from other practice areas and other offices that I wouldn't, I would know them, but I wouldn't really know them well. And I wouldn't get to work with them. And so I get to sit in a room with them and talk to them and hear them, how they think about things, and how they go about making complicated decisions. And so there's sort of a perspective that I'm able to gain from these incredible lawyers that I would never otherwise get to see that from, that I think has really been valuable for me. And it's sort of, I don't know that I would say the last time I had a decision to make it a litigation, I was channeling someone from the management committee, but I do think that we all absorb things that we learn from other people, and being surrounded by these like brilliant leaders, I have to be, I know I am absorbing from them, and that's making me better. So that's one way I think that definitely has helped me in my practice. And then the other thing I think is, in the same vein, but it's like taking a step back and thinking about the big picture. Taking a step back and thinking about the perspectives of people that don't have the same experience as you. We always have to do that as litigators and trial lawyers, right? Because we're going to ultimately have to present our case to a judge or a jury that doesn't have the same perspective that we do, or the same information that we do. But I think when you're thinking about running a firm that is a lot of different people in a lot of different geographies with different practices and different clients, like every decision you make, you have to sort of affirmatively step back from your own perspective. And while you want to contribute for your perspective, because the reason we are elected presumably is so that all these different perspectives are reflected, you also have to very consciously say like, okay, but that's great, but how does that impact this other office or this other practice area or this other set of clients in this other industry? And I think as a litigator and a trial lawyer, especially someone that's sort of getting more and more senior and sort of dealing more and more with like really in complicated webs of considerations and problems and legal challenges, and doing a lot of advising clients, even outside the courtroom on those kinds of problems, like the muscle memory of sort of forcing yourself to take a step back and think about it from the perspective of other constituencies has been really valuable. And that came from management. And I think it's now a big part of how I think about how I advise clients as well.
What's an example of perceiving an issue from multiple constituencies?
So it doesn't even have to be like a big thing, but different practices have like different rhythms. So here's an example that every institution in the world is talking about right now, which is like return to office. And, how many days a week should we be asking people to be in the office? And I would naturally think about it from my perspective, which is someone that lives in the Bay Area, the people that I work with, the people in the office that I'm with, the people that have the kind of schedules and practice that I have. And so I have views about that based on those experiences. But then I have to sort of take a step back and think, we have a lot of colleagues at our firm that are transactional lawyers whose rhythms of their job are very different than mine. Like they don't go away to trial for 4 weeks. They may actually be in the office every day working at a table with their younger colleagues in a way that litigators who are off at deposition or trial or hearings may not be. So that's such a small example, but actually I had to sort of take a step back and say, okay, I can't project my view as someone that's on the road all the time on other people's practices where being in the office is a meaningfully different experience for them than it might be for me. And so again, such a superficial thing, but actually forcing myself to think about that in an express way every time I try to think about a decision has been, I think, good for me. It's been good for me to get out of my little self-centered Sonal universe. It's always good for people to get out of their little self-centered universes, but it's been good for me to practice doing that.
And speaking of learning from others and looking outside for inspiration, is there a firm that you really admire?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's so many firms that I admire for so many different things. I was thinking about this question, and I predicted that you might ask me this question based on our earlier conversation. And this is a totally completely apples to oranges comparison, but that's part of why I was thinking about it is you mentioned earlier Kalpana, and that you did an interview with Kalpana. Kalpana is a co-managing partner of Sussman Godfrey. And that firm is so completely different from our firm. And, I think, and it has to be, right? Our system only works if there are firms like that. And there are firms like ours, and there are different types of matters and different types of clients. And we just are operating in different areas of the industry, and the industry needs both. But I really do respect so much of what a firm like that does in terms of the way that they think about the business, in terms of the way that they think about, from what I've observed, obviously never worked there, the way they think about recruiting and retaining talent, the way they structure their trial teams, the tremendous trial successes they've had, the business successes they've had. So like, we could never be that firm. And, it would make no sense for us to want to be that firm in every respect. But I do really respect a lot about sort of what I've observed about that firm from the outside. And I think that and I think we should always look for learnings from firms that are a lot like ours, but also from firms that are really different, to see what parts of the way other people are doing it we can steal, right? Like, I mean, it's the highest form of flattery, really, to like look at another firm or another institution and say, they're doing that really well. We should think about doing that here too. And I don't know that it would be direct with a firm like Sussman, but I think there's indirect learnings that we can gain from that firm and from lots of other firms.
And then how about, is there a lawyer whose career trajectory you really admire?
Yeah, I really hope that like they don't listen to this. So we're going to try to avoid ever mentioning that I did this podcast so that I don't embarrass them. But someone that's been really influential in my career is Paul Graywall, who I suspect a lot of your listeners are familiar with. And I knew him when he was on the bench, and I appeared before him as an associate. And have very fond memories of that. And then knew him when he was at Facebook, and know him now that he's at Coinbase. And really, he's been part of this is like, I couldn't be more grateful to Paul than I am. I would say, in terms of impact on my career, he's probably one of the top 3 most impactful people I've ever worked with as a mentor. And he was really largely responsible for my expansion of my practice to move beyond just IP litigation to also covering all types of different complex litigation matters, because he really sort of I don't know why, but he gave me my first non-IP matter. I can't imagine why he thought that was a good idea. But he did. And then, it's sort of grown from there. So a lot of this is like gratefulness. But I'm trying to sort of set that aside for a moment and actually objectively think about like why I admire him so much. And there's a couple things, I think. And again, Paul, please don't listen to this. One of them is he is like he's like the epitome in some ways of the like everything's going great and then you break it anyway and then go do something else. Like if you think about his career, he's just like great IP litigator, and then he goes and he takes the judgeship, and then he's like one of the most well-respected judges anywhere in the country. And people just like, we're desperate to be in his courtroom as much as possible because they loved being in front of him. And he like gave that up to go take this like really hard, complicated job at Facebook. And then he's like running litigation at Facebook, and is in the thick of it and dealing with all like the most sophisticated, most complex legal issues. And it's going great. And then like he's gone to be the CLO at Coinbase, and is like now in crypto, as if it was going to be easy to be the CLO of Coinbase in the current environment relating to crypto. It's like, it's like really hard to walk away from something when it's going great and go into something that's going to be harder and more uncertain, and where you really don't know how it's going to go. And he's like such the epitome of someone that's like done that over and over and over again and just jumped in and then like killed it when he went to the next place. And I just admire that so much. And then the other thing about him that I really admire is, we were talking earlier about civility. He is, look, I mean, he's really tough as a judge and a client. Like he's super smart. He asks hard questions. He's not giving anyone a free pass, but he's so unfailingly kind. I remember being in his courtroom, and I was like waiting for a discovery hearing or something. And there was a matter before ours. And I think it was like a traffic violation or a parking ticket. And I think because it was like on federal land, it actually went to a federal judge. But I was there for like this massive discovery fight, like a really consequential discovery fight, this like massive IP litigation, big tech companies, big client, big law firms on both sides, high stakes. And then there was like a, small matter. I was probably a few $100s at most. I think it was like parking or something like that. And they were before us, and he was just so respectful to, it was an individual. It wasn't even a lawyer. He was so respectful to the individual, welcomed them to his court, went through the process, gave them full like airing of the issues, full opportunity, explain the process to them. And I was sort of thinking, and then he came in and did the exact same thing for our like big fancy high stakes patent dispute. And I was thinking like that kindness and respect, which I've seen him have in every context. God, I wish we had more of that. I wish we had more of that in the law. I wish we had more of that in the world. I wish we all had that kind of respect for every single person that we encounter. And I admired that a lot too.
Yeah, I observed that from a great judge in the Northern District of Illinois, Chief Judge James Holderman, who I externed for, and he had routinely he had people like pro se, and there's a selection factor for the kinds of people that end up with pro se. They tend to have no case. They tend to be, shall we say, cranks or potentially, maybe have got some mental health issues. And I observed, just like you're saying, that character of with how he approached those people in those conversations, in those hearings. And he had said of that, he said, hey, that my approach to this is I'm a public servant. And then part of what I'm here for is give people an outlet so that they don't take out their anger on the world in some other format. So, that's not, I think that was beyond his job. I think he went beyond the call of his job as just somebody who's genuinely interested in the public well-being, and policy. It sounds like he's the same way. I think part of what you're talking about, Paul, that you admire is his willingness. I think it's betting on yourself and investing in yourself. And so can you share some tips for people that are, I guess at any stage of their career, it could be geared more in terms of people who are more junior. I think all of us at every stage of the career we're all trying to grow something, right? You talked about business development. That's the frontier for yourself because, you've kind of tapped out these other frontiers. You've taken enough depositions to stay. So we all have something we're developing. So in terms of advice on investing in yourself or betting on yourself, what are frameworks or tools that you want to impart on people for how to, identify opportunities and how to invest in yourself and make the bet?
Yeah. I mean, I think part of this is just, you have to kind of get comfortable that, you're going to do things. They're not always going to work out perfectly. But you've got to be willing to take risks. And some of the best things that have happened in my career have been risks that I've taken or things that I've done where it was like, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I'm just going to go with it. And like great things can come from that. And so I think part of betting on yourself is getting comfortable with the risks. I also think part of it is, it's easier to bet on yourself when you have the safety net of support. And I think that comes from mentoring and from people that are your advocates and your supporters. And I've had I can't even begin to talk about how lucky I've gotten in that arena, in so many different ways from so many different people at different stages of my career. But the thing I think that is really, at least for me, looking back, that's important about that is, it's easier to bet on yourself when you've got those people. And I think it's easy to have sort of preconceptions about who those people are going to be or what those people are going to look like. And I would just urge, especially the younger lawyers, to just don't worry about that. anyone that's willing to invest in you and your career and your development, like grab that person and and try to get them to engage with you and try to get them to invest in you as much as possible. Because if they invest in you and your success, then, it's amazing how much more success you'll have, right? If all these like brilliant, successful people are invested in you, they're going to want to see you do well, and that's going to help you. For me, like I didn't have a lot of really any women or, people of color as mentors when I was a very young associate. But I had like amazing mentors, that were men, and it was great. They went out of their way to help me in every way possible with no reward for themselves and give me opportunities and support my career. And like, if I had been really focused on like finding a woman of color mentor and close myself off to that, I would have ended up like cutting off all of this tremendous mentorship and support that I got. Or like another example is I had this like really hard fought case against another firm, for many years. And there was a senior partner on the other side. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, this has happened to me twice. There's a senior partner on the other side who, as much as like the cases were hard fought and litigated really, I don't want to say like aggressively because they were very civil, but like aggressively on the merits, they were litigated. In both of these cases, the senior partner on the other side, after the case was over, reached out to me and said, they were both men, by the way. And neither were people of color. They were both white men, and they were a lot older than me. And they both reached out to me a decade apart and said, I think you're really tremendously talented. If there's anything I can ever do to support you in your career, I really hope that you'll reach out to me. And these were my opposing counsel, right? And so like, I just think we should grab that mentorship and that support anywhere that we can get it. Cause it's like, it will allow you to take those risks and bet on yourself.
That's good. Well, I think we have a lot of food for thought here. And I think, notwithstanding your initial comments to me, there were very interesting stories and ideas that you have throughout your career. So I'm really glad that we took the time to explore those with you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm not sure that that's true. But as I told you, when we first embarked on this, if there's, even one younger lawyer that actually made it all the way through this, and listens to it and found a nugget or two, that might be helpful to them as they're navigating their career, then it was a joy for me to do it, and it was well worth it. And I'm grateful to you for the time and the opportunity.